The stories I'm about to share with you are from The Tragedy at Devil's Hollow and Other Kentucky Ghost Stories by Michael Paul Henson. I would like to give thanks to those in assistance tonight: Mr. Chris Schaus, Ed Hughes, Clay Case, Miss Stacy Kindred, and Brody the Wonder Dog. John Gilliam's Revenge. John Gilliam was one of the few men from Kentucky who went to Cuba in 1899 with Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. About a year before he left his eastern Kentucky home for the war, Gilliam had married an attractive Irene Stidham. When he left, he advised all the young men in the neighborhood to keep away from his wife while he was gone. Gilliam was killed in Cuba. There were several witnesses who saw him and his horse blown up. Only pieces of either body was ever recovered. His cavalry sword and pistol were never found. When Joseph Larch, a young man in the community, heard about Gilliam's death, he talked the young widow into letting him move in with her. Lonely Irene agreed to the arrangement. The liaison was frowned upon by most neighbors, but the young couple caused no trouble, so the situation was tolerated. Irene and Joseph had been living together for about a year when she first saw a man who looked exactly like her dead husband. He was dressed in riding breeches, wore a campaign hat, and carried a cavalry sword and pistol. On each occasion, the man would stand at the edge of the timber line on a small hill in back of the house and stare at Irene intently each time she went outside. Then he would walk back into the woods. He always led a large black horse, but never mounted it. He always stood on the exact spot where Irene had last seen her husband as he walked up the path and into the woods on his way to Cuba. Several days after she first saw the strange sight, Irene finally told Joseph about him. When they went to the window so she could point out the spot where the man always appeared, they saw him standing there, looking down at the house. Knowing that John Gilliam was dead, and determined to learn the identity of this stranger, Larch took his rifle, slipped out the back door, and circled the hill. This positioned him behind the stranger, who was still watching the house, the large black stallion beside him. Larch aimed his rifle and told the man to turn around, but the man did not move, did not even seem to hear him. Larch fired, and the man fell, turning onto his back. Joseph Larch later swore the body had no face. The black horse stood over the body and refused to let Larch near it. Two young boys playing in the woods had heard Larch approach and had hidden in the bushes. They witnessed the shooting and ran home to tell their parents, who called the law. By the time Larch returned to Irene's, the sheriff and his deputies were there, and they had him accompany them to the scene of the shooting. Larch was amazed to see that the dead man's body was face down in a large pool of blood. Again, the horse feet planted firmly astride the man stopped all attempts to examine the body. Tracks were evident where the horse had been walking around the body. It was nearly dark, and not wanting to kill the animal, the men decided to wait until the next morning to retrieve the body. They had hoped during the night the horse would wander away. Larch was arrested and taken to jail. Returning the next morning, the sheriff and his men were amazed to find that both the dead man and the horse were gone. There was no pool of blood, no indication of horse tracks, and hours of searching failed to turn up any evidence of a shooting. It was as if the tragedy had never occurred. The sheriff stopped by Irene's house to check on her and to see if she wanted to visit Larch at the jail. He found her laying in bed on her back, with a short cavalry saber through her stomach and a look of terror on her face. She'd been dead for several hours. The sheriff returned to his office and was told that Larch was dead also. Fingernail marks and bruises on his swollen neck clearly indicated that he had been strangled to death. But the jailer and 2 deputies swore that Larch had not been out of his cell all night and that no one had visited him. Although the coroner admitted that it was impossible for a man to choke himself to death, Joseph Larch's death was declared a suicide. There was no other logical answers. The death of Irene Gilliam and Joseph Larch have never been explained. Did John Gilliam somehow come back from the dead to punish them? The tragedy is a matter of court record. Only the names have been changed. Author's note: investigation into John Gilliam's military records revealed that he was definitely killed in action in Cuba by an exploding shell. At the time of his death, Gilliam was wearing riding breeches, a campaign hat, and because of the rough terrain, was leading his large black horse up the hill. You never know.